This is the Hype Squad with Charli McConnell, a podcast where women can be full of themselves and brag about what they're good at. Each week, we're going to bring you conversations covering topics like motherhood, life, relationships, business, and everything in between, because anything is possible with your very own Hype Squad. What's up, ladies? Welcome back to the Hype Squad. I'm Charli McConnell, your host, and today we have Emily Rose on. I'm so excited to welcome Emily. She is also the face of Mama Wilder. That may be how you know her on Instagram. She spearheaded the Mama Wilder organization in 2021 when she began to utilize her platform to raise money for women in similar crisis as her own. Having survived family and criminal court not totally unscathed, she spends her time raising her 3 kids and supporting her husband in his business and legal ventures. She uses her BA in Women and Gender Studies, educating the masses on coercive control, financial abuse, and the importance of women's autonomy in healthcare. Emily, welcome to the Hype Squad.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
I'm so excited you're here. I've been looking forward to this for so long. I'm so excited we're here. I want to start first of all, and I'll go into the story of how I know you. But if for anyone who's listening or watching this who's not familiar with you on Instagram, can you give us a little bit of backstory on your platform, what you're sharing, your message, all of those fun things?
I started Mama Wilder. Wilder is my daughter's middle name. And I started it when I was a new mom. I was a single mom at 22. And I created, it was a blog. It was just a blog about breastfeeding and being a single mom and cloth diapering. It was very holistic and earthy crunchy. I was living on a homestead at the time with my best friend's older sister. And I moved out west from New York to Colorado. And so I started talking about my experience living out west and more as a single mom. And then I ended up marrying someone. And there were all types of coercive control, financial abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. I was really isolated. I was really a prime candidate for that type of relationship dynamic, not realizing it. And it wasn't until I had another baby at home, I divorced him and I removed myself and my girls from that situation, that I realized that it was so much worse than I think I thought. And so I started talking about it. I started talking about my experience. And shortly after I left my first husband, I ended up in criminal court as a victim in a stalking case. And that really shaped a lot of my perspective now. I ended up meeting my current husband, who was a prosecutor at the time. We met totally organically outside of the courthouse, but he was in the same office handling the case with my first husband. And that was kind of its own scandal, but it was fun. And we ended up working out. We have a baby, and he adopted my eldest daughter. And so I've seen the system from all different sides. And we just sharing about it has been so much more. I didn't expect the feedback and the attention that I got talking about this experience and how universal this experience was for so many women. And so I kind of found my niche talking about this stuff, because I think when you talk about women's autonomy in healthcare and like home birth and, birthing outside of the system, the mainstream medical model, there's a lot of overlap with coercive control in relationship dynamics and power and control dynamics and abuse, because a lot of those things like domestic violence and obstetric violence have a lot of overlapping parts. And so I was just also interconnected. And once I talked about that and I really highlighted that, it just snowballed from there. And it was a really interesting trajectory, because at some point we became a 501c3. I had been fundraising kind of informally on social media for years. And I met my husband, and he was a practicing attorney at the time. And he was like, that's a tax nightmare. We need to like make this legit. So you're
Clean
not
this up a little bit.
funneling money. Like this is tax fraud. So we became a 501c3. And now we have a board of 8 women, and we review applications. Women are writing in, asking for assistance, asking for resources. And so that's a full-time, like that is around the clock. There's no set hours for that. And so that has been really mind-blowing. Just there's such a need for women, because so many women, especially stay-at-home moms who maybe like me wanted to just raise their babies and be home with their babies and breastfeed their babies and have very intentional attached motherhood experiences, they find themselves on the receiving end of financial abuse. And they're like, how do I get out? I don't have any money. I deliberately chose to be with my children, but now I can't go get a job. Like, how do I get out of this situation? And so it was very, like I said, it was a universal experience I went through, got myself out of, and now I talk about it because I survived it. And not everyone does. So that's a lot of my audience now, is mainly women who are home with their babies and who maybe are not in great situations and want to exit those. And so here we are talking about it.
So I've been following you for a couple of years. We talked about this before we started recording. And I just want to say, like, before I go into my whole side of this, like, you're such an advocate for so many different things. And even like listening to you talk right then, I was like, well, shit, I totally forgot we could talk about home births and all this
We
stuff. Like,
could.
there's so much we could come back and talk about again. I was a labor and delivery nurse before I
Really?
started doing coaching. So there's so much we could unpack with that. Um, but I think the level of advocacy that you're doing on so many different fronts, whether it's healthcare, home birthing, the legal system, financial abuse, like all forms of abuse, and raising
Mhm.
your kids. I can remember seeing you, and you've done this so many times, like trying to raise money for someone who reached out to you who needed breast milk or who
Mhm.
needed formula during 2020. Like, so, and I'm like, oh my God. First of all, now that I am somewhat in the social media realm of like having to post content and stuff, I now understand the level of time and commitment it takes to actually be in there and like navigating all of that stuff. But you've done that since the whole time I've been following you, and I'm sure like way before that as well. But I think your content is so educational, and that's kind of what brings me to this story is I started following you, and I joked about this before we recorded. I don't know what the algorithm thought that I needed from your page specifically, but it was incredible just to learn from you. Like, it wasn't like I was going to your page for some specific sort of insight. I was just I remember thinking I'm huge on like sounds, like voices, and your voice was very calming. And like when I would hear your stories and stuff, I'm like, I don't care what she's saying. I'm going to listen and I'm going to learn from her. But I started learning a lot about legal issues that you were facing, stuff that I am uh, privileged to a point that I've never had to deal with that type of thing in my life. And so it was like I was seeing this whole other side of the world that I didn't understand. Fast forward, and that's just following you passively, right? Fast forward to coaching. I'm coaching women, and I have one specific client who is trying to leave her partner with her two children. She is trying to figure out what it looks like to get a home and a house and pay her bills. And she's financially dependent on him and so many things. And in a lot of ways, I didn't have a lot of help for her. I was really struggling and like pointing her in the right direction. But I sent her to your page, and I said, just watch her stories, watch her reels, whatever. She's a wealth of knowledge. I'm not going to point you in any specific direction, but just learn from her because she shares a ton of stuff about the legal system. A couple of weeks later, she updates me, and she had gone to your website. And I didn't even know you were doing this part, but she had gone to your website. You had a nonprofit set up. She applied for a grant. She was approved, which now knowing more, like you guys are reading and reviewing these applicants. And she received, I think it was like a $300 grant that paid her car payment the month that she left her partner. And I'll say this, like for a lot of people that I know are in situations like that, like if I would have offered to give her $300, it would not have been the same thing. It would have not, it would have been like, um, I don't know, just the exchange of finances like that. Some people are really, really particular about, and it makes them uncomfortable. But something about reaching out to you and sharing her story and getting that sort of help. And I said this to you before we recorded, it felt almost like a permission slip to her, like the universe was giving her a sign. This is where I'm supposed to be. I need to push forward. And she did. And she's on the other side of that. And she's very happy and outside of that relationship and so many things. And I think what you're doing is incredible. And I know that it just started as like an Instagram page and sharing your story, but it has morphed into so much more than that. And I just want to applaud you for that because I wish there were more women out there authentically sharing their stories and and realizing how much it helps people. It's a huge deal.
It's sometimes hard to remember that because there have been some, like when you asked me before we began, we were talking about the nonprofit and I was explaining to you how it's funded. It just jogged my memory. I was just testifying about that in court because I am so open about my experience and I have had to account for that and talk about that in court in front of a judge several times. It's come up in criminal trials. It's come up in DV cases. It's come up in family court. So I know that there are eyes on me and people are listening and probably transcribing my interviews and stuff. And so I try to keep it very even keeled. But if sharing my story is going to help just one person, like if I can attract a certain following and that will generate money that I can then hand back out to someone in that situation, like it's totally worth it because I feel like I'm so privileged and it's such an advantage in my situation, despite how complex and complicated it's been. I do feel very lucky. Like I've been given like this, I've made it out. Like my thing, not entirely unscathed, but I have overcome so much of it that I look at women who are not as lucky and I'm like, okay, if I can talk about it and it's benefiting someone like financially somewhere, then it's worth it. It's okay. And I'll speak to that and I will testify to that. So I love to hear that because a lot of times we don't really hear back from people after they get their grant and they leave. Like it's almost like there's really no follow-up there.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we do like this is what's happened now and this is what we're doing and that's been great. But a lot of times those women just need like that green light, like you're making the right decision. We see how dire the situation is. You can go. Here's some cash, get out of there. And I totally get what that feels like, just having a green light. Like I remember saving money to leave. And I remember it was actually an ex-girlfriend of my first husband who called and said, here's how you can get out of this. Here's a way to save up money. And it was during COVID. And I remember that was like a permission slip for me. Like, oh my God, like this is a sign. Like this is my ticket out. And it saved my life. I was able to leave and get a place of my own and find a job and get my kids in childcare. Like it was just something so small for her to do. Like she just heard about this and she thought of me and she's like, I think this might help you. And it changed my life.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And I think like there are so many like guardian angels out there around us that are wanting to help. And you may not even realize like one little sentence that you say as like support may be that one thing that somebody needed to hear to give them permission. And I think a lot of people find that from your page. I really, really do. And I've seen that firsthand. Some of the things I wanted to kind of touch on, and I said before we started, there are multiple clients that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to reference them specifically, but I'm like, I need help. Like, where do I guide them? Where do I push them? And I think a lot of it comes down to the financial abuse. I told you earlier, I listened to a podcast. You talked about financial literacy. And all of these clients are not stay-at-home moms and they're working and things like that. But I do think there's this level of financial control that happens in so many relationships that in my experience, what I've witnessed is that's kind of like the make or break it moment where it's like if I can just pay my bills and have enough money to get out, then I can get out. If I can get an apartment and pay a deposit and all of these things, especially with kids. What are some of the tips you would give women who are listening to this that are kind of finding them in that place to save money or to get to that place? Where do you start?
Well, I just had someone in my living room a couple of weeks ago who she is fully employed and her child's in childcare and she's trying to leave her husband. There's absolutely some coercive control. And I asked her and I said, do you have your own bank account? And she's like, no. She had been married before and divorced, never had children, remarried, and still didn't have her own bank account, like with separate from this person. And so I said, that's the first thing you need to do. You need to go make your own bank account. You can do it on your phone. You don't need to go in person. You can do it completely remotely. Get a bank account and just if you're employed, put your paychecks in there. I know so many women whose paychecks they're getting direct deposit to their joint account or to their husband's accounts and not their own. And that should be the first thing. You need your own bank account because you can't go get a new car. You can't sign a lease. You can't get a phone plan that's your own or join someone else's without your own bank account. And it's something so easy that it should just be the first step. You don't need
Mm.
permission. Like, it's not the 1970s anymore. We can go get our own bank accounts, which is crazy that it was not that long ago. We couldn't, but that needs to be the very first thing. Like, if you don't have your own bank account, even just a checking account, never mind like a high yield savings account, which is a whole other thing you can learn about. High yield savings accounts, there are so many accounts that are online you can sign up with banks, just to slowly save cash and have it grow.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to get your husband's permission to do that. And I wouldn't even think about, well, isn't he going to take half? I wouldn't even cross that bridge until you get to that point, because right now, just getting out, if it's a safety concern, that needs to be your focus, and making a plan to leave. Because I like to call it the cascade of legal abuse. So often what we see, especially reviewing these applications, they'll reach a breaking point, whether they're employed or they're not employed, or they're stay-at-home moms, whatever. They'll reach a breaking point in their marriages and they'll say, I'm done, I want a divorce, or I'm done with you, I want out. But they don't have a plan. And the first thing he's going to do is cut her phone off, cancel her car payment, or like say you're not taking the car, or report her car stolen, or drain the bank accounts. Draining the bank accounts is usually the first thing that these men do, because they're like, well, how are you going to leave me? You're not going to abandon me and reject me if you don't have cash. So he can't take what's not his. So if you have a bank account in your own name, he can't touch, he doesn't have access to, he can't drain it. That
Mm-hmm.
needs to be the very first thing that these people do.
So if you're I'm just going to play devil's advocate here for a second. If you're getting direct deposit from your paychecks and you're wanting to start putting money aside because maybe there's abuse in the relationship, or maybe it's something you're not wanting to have a conversation with your partner yet about, I would assume that it would be a lot harder to go straight to putting your paycheck in an account without having to have a big conversation with your partner about why and what's going on and all that stuff. So I bring this up because on the podcast I heard you talking about you were selling purses and clothes and stuff on the side to get cash. So is that something, like, if the conversation could not happen of putting your paycheck in a separate account, is that kind of where you would lead next, is start selling stuff, start pulling cash wherever you
You
can?
know, yeah, absolutely. So like if you have a nice, if you can part with some items that are valuable, absolutely do that. Downsize, purge. Wherever you're going to move next, you're not going to want to take a lot of stuff with you because moving
Mm-hmm.
is laborious. But I would have a conversation with my employer. If my paycheck was going directly to my husband's account, I would have a conversation with my employer and maybe taper it off, and maybe direct some of it to one account and some of it to another, or maybe open up a high yield savings account where you don't need a lot of money to start accruing interest, and maybe start putting it away in that high yield savings account, just a percentage, and over time increase that percentage. And just maybe have a conversation with your employer about, like, here's what's going on. Because that's the other thing, I think, when women are in these situations and they're making a plan, they really need to call in their communities and let people know, here's what's going on. Because the most dangerous time in a woman's life is when she's leaving a relationship where there is coercive control. And actually, the strongest predictor of future homicide in a relationship is not physical violence in the past, it's controlling behavior. Controlling behavior, your partner being controlling, is a stronger indicator that he might kill you one day than him ever laying hands on you. And so I think once people hear that, they're like, oh, my husband's totally controlling. He's never hit me, but he's so controlling. That's worse than him ever punching you square in the face. I just smashed my hand down. I'm so mad. But
Oh, yeah.
definitely call in your community, have a conversation with your employer if it's safe to do so, and just say,
Mm-hmm.
here's what's going on. I'm trying to leave. Sometimes I've heard of women getting an advance on their paycheck from their employer. Like, they'll prepay them a month in advance. Like, I know you're going to show up every day. Here's some extra cash to help you, because your employer, your community, your friends, your family, they should want you to be safe. And I
Mm-hmm.
think being honest with them, like, here, I'm making a plan. I don't have this part figured out yet. I'm trying to figure it out. I see women joining their friends or their relatives' phone lines to have a phone. I remember when I left, we were still on a joint phone plan. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
went back and forth throughout our marriage, because anytime we had a joint plan, he would shut my phone off when we'd get to have disagreements. So when we left, I had the phone paid off, but I didn't have service. And it was one of the things I had to do, was to go find new service, because he immediately cut it off. Like, and if he
Mm-hmm.
had my money, he would have taken that too. If he had my car, he would have taken that. So you have to think, what are all the things that are not just mine that someone can take from me? How can I make sure that he can't take them from me? Because even men who don't do those things, like, I think it's better to err on the side of caution and have those things lined up rather than just gamble and be like, well, he'll understand if I want to divorce him. I would bet that he's not going to be understanding and okay with you abandoning him. And I would rather you be proactive and take necessary steps to protect yourself than wait and find out when you have no money, no car, no phone.
Yeah. Yeah, always be prepared because people will surprise you. I mean, obviously there's something going on that you're wanting to get away from in the first place. Your intuition is probably, well, it's never wrong in my opinion. It's like our superpower. Um I think too, like state funded support that's out there because when you have kids, it's a whole nother ball game. And financial support through the state. I think you're in Colorado. Are you in Colorado?
We are in Colorado, yeah.
So, and I mean, depending on where anyone's listening, but stuff specific with Colorado too, or if you know other states, but some of the state funded support things that you could reach out to, what were some of your experience with that? How did that process work?
So, the hardest part for me for accepting welfare was breaking out of that mindset that welfare is something to be ashamed of. I mean, I've worked since I was 14 years old. I grew up in a very conservative family. Like I was raised to look down on people who were on welfare. And so having to apply for that for the first time and rely on it was humbling. And I remember, so the programs in Colorado and in other states, and we have this on our website, our website we're merging right now. Hopefully by the time this airs, it'll all be smooth sailing, but there's childcare assistance. So if your child is in daycare age, like pre-kindergarten, the state can help with they'll subsidize a portion of it or all of it. There's food assistance. So depending on your state, you can apply for basically just a debit card to go to the grocery store. It'll pay for organic food. I was buying organic grass-fed beef with food stamps for my two kids. It was a godsend. There's Medicaid. You can get everyone into therapy with Medicaid. Medicaid will cover the cost of a therapist. Then there's cash assistance. If when you leave, you don't have a job and you have less than a certain amount of money in your bank account, maybe a couple $100, you can apply for what's called, at least in Colorado, it's called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, otherwise known as cash assistance. So definitely look into those programs. If you don't have income, you don't have a job, you don't have cash saved up, you don't have a safety net, or your family's not willing to step up and help, those are definitely legitimate options. And there's no shame in that. I'm not on those programs anymore, but it was such a lifesaver, excuse me. And in fact, part of the reason I married my first husband was because I didn't know about those programs. And I was really in a position where I was isolated from my family. I couldn't afford to live where I was living. And he kind of stepped up as like, I'll be your savior. Like you can live with me and we'll move to where my family is and it'll be so great. And I tell my husband this now, I'm like, if I had just known I could have applied for food stamps and childcare assistance, I wouldn't have been working 45, 50 hours a week just to pay for rent and daycare. And I was bringing my baby with me. I was working at a daycare place. So had I known, first of all, and had I gotten through those mental blocks of accepting a handout, I probably wouldn't have ended up in that position. I would have been financially better on my own rather than feeling obligated to marry someone who was truly never really good to me. Like he wasn't like Prince Charming. I was in such a bad place emotionally that I'm like, well, who else is going to put up with me in my situation? Like I'm a single mom. Like I should just take what I can get, right? Now I know that that's fucking crazy, but at the time I didn't know better. And so I just took the first person who came along and I settled, and it was a terrible decision. But had I known about those resources, I might have made different decisions.
Yeah, it's like the path of least resistance. It's like, here's someone's offering me an option. Well, and two, like I think most people don't realize that the resources are out there, but I also think they're not all really easy to acquire, right? Like it's a ton of application, it's a ton of knocking on doors. It's like the persistence.
It's knocking on doors. You have to be persistent. And that's the thing about, if someone's listening to this and they're not sure how they're going to make this leap, the thing that you really need to know is that being a single parent is going to require you to advocate for yourself and you're going to be uncomfortable speaking up, because what you've done so far is how you got into this position, right? Like being passive and not standing up for yourself and communicating boundaries and asking for things is how you ended up with this person who treats you like dog shit. But if you want something different, you have to make different decisions. And one of those things is knocking on doors, bringing the kids with you and saying, hi, we need Medicaid right now, or hi,
Yeah.
I need to feed my kids, I can't feed them, I need an EBT card today.
Mm.
And getting comfortable with being kind of a pain in the ass. Like, I don't, at this point in time, I'm not, like, I joke with my friends and my husband. I'm like, nothing scares me anymore, because I've walked up to some of the most powerful people in my local community, government and law enforcement wise, and I've articulated my thoughts to them, and nothing really intimidates me. Nothing scares me. I think testifying in front of a judge so many times and representing myself kind of just molded me into someone completely different. But I know that 5 years ago, like we talked about 5 years ago, if I could see me now, I'd be like, oh, she's a little scary. You have to be a little scary if you want to
Mhm.
survive in this world on your own with these kids. Like, I can be soft and I can lean into, being a wife and a mom because I have a supportive partner now. But when it was just me, I had to be put on these shoes and be this role of the advocate and the protector. And I had to make no apologies for it. Like, you kind of have to be a bitch if you want to get anywhere in life. And especially if you're a single mom and you're looking ahead and you're going to be a single mom, maybe you have to get comfortable with being a pain in the ass to people. And that's just the only way you're going to survive.
I love all of that. One of the things I thought about listening to that, my mom is a single mom, and I think there were four of us.
Oh my
I was a big surprise. I was much, much younger than my older sisters. But I say all the time, like, I was raised by a bad bitch. Like, I
God.
may
Mhm.
not be a single mom now, but I was raised by one. And so and I think about like even your kids, your girls, especially like being raised by a female who knows her power and will stand up to people around her,
Mhm.
regardless of what sex they are, just like standing up for herself and her kids is a level of power that's kind of hard to articulate unless you've been in the house of it, right? Unless you've actually, what is that picture?
This is a picture. So I'm standing there. Hold on, there's like a light blue figure right here.
Uh
This
huh.
this is a courtroom. This is a courtroom. These two men are prosecutors. This is a cop. That's me holding my newborn baby, and I'm saying something to the district attorney,
Uh huh.
which it wasn't offensive. But this is one of my favorite moments as a mom because it really highlights, like, I'm in my most vulnerable state, postpartum, leaking breast. I think I had COVID. Actually, I couldn't smell anything. I was like, I
Mm.
had the flu. It was awful. But it was one of my most favorite moments as a mom looking back now, because I was like, that person, like, I would have never anticipated becoming that person when I was in all the shit that I was in. And so I had it framed. I keep it up there
I
just to
love
remind
it.
me.
Well, I think too, like a lot of people, and I've had people say this to me for my own motherhood journey. People will say like you're so strong, or I don't know how you got through it. And I'm like, you get through it because you don't have a choice. Like you're
You
a
don't have a
mom,
choice.
you have these kids. Like it's no longer about you, it's about your children, and it's about standing up for what's right. I can only imagine how different your journey would have been had you not had these kids when you went through this divorce. Like a very different story. But
Yeah.
having children, it especially for mothers, I'm sure it happens for dads too. I don't want to discount that in any capacity, but for moms, it is just like I'll move mountains. Like I will put everything else before myself. My kids come first. I'll
Mhm.
do whatever I have to do. And for me, like even being raised in that environment, it was like but I also think kind of skewed too. Like my idea of men in my life is a very skewed as well. So there's balance that has to be
Mhm.
acquired once you get of age. But I think it's incredible to see what women are capable of at a very early age. And I think it does something to little girls when they get to see that. And I say that to say, any woman that's listening to this who has kids and you're afraid of what it's going to do to your kids, yeah, it's going to change their life. It's going to change their trajectory. But also think about the strength that you're going to have to fortify in order to do what you need to do. Your kids need to see that too,
Mhm.
right?
I
There's a
grew
lot
up
of
watching,
power.
I watched my mom be financially abused her whole life by her family. And she didn't, I remember when she called me in her 50s and she was like, I just bought my first car in my name in my 50s.
Wow.
And my mother never owned a house by herself. She was divorced twice. And each time her dad bought her a house, gave her a salary, paid for all of her bills. I mean, my mother didn't really know the definition of struggle. She's
Mm.
always worked for the family. So she always had a safety net, and she was very honest. She's like, I've always had a safety net. We're estranged now, but she made it clear that that was her safety net, and my family she would said one time, she goes, well, you're not lucky like I was. You didn't have two rich parents or something like that. And I was like, oh, so you're very honest. But I grew up watching my mother never have, like, I thought she was a badass, a bad bitch who advocated for her kids. And then I grew up and I was like, oh, that really wasn't the case.
Mm.
Like, this woman never, I didn't have an example of someone who really was in control of things and had to really just lean on herself and rely on herself and had no safety net. So I had to create this person that I am now out of thin air, because that person, I didn't know I didn't know someone like me 30 years ago or 20 years ago. I like this just single moms, the single moms I knew had families supporting them and like really like paying for their lifestyles. And my dad came in as my hero. I remember my beloved SUV died about a year after, it was a year after I left my ex-husband, 2 weeks before he was charged with stalking me, and my car died. And I was like, oh my God. And I called both my parents. They're separated, of course. I called my mom, and my mom said, why don't you give the kids to your ex-husband while you figure out the car situation? And I was like, what? Like, I had a restraining order against him. It just made no sense. I called my dad. My dad said, give me a second. And at first he said, I'll help you buy a car. I'll co-sign for you. And then he called me later and he goes, just kidding. I'm going to drive up a car and you can lease it from me, is what he said. And it was a Pathfinder. And he said, I'll drive it up. We're not using it. You can lease it from me. You just pay me monthly, whatever you pay for a car payment. And so as I take him to the airport to leave, because he drove it up and he flew back to New Orleans, and I said, can we create a bank account through our joint? Because we both have USAA because he's military. And I said, can we create a joint account together where I can just monthly put the money in monthly? And he goes, no. And he's like, that car's yours. I'm not charging you a penny for it. And
Wow.
so having a windfall like that, like a vehicle, it was a godsend. Like, I think about all these women whose siblings or whose friends have cars just sitting in their driveways. Like, to offer up a vehicle to someone, a single mom in a time of need, is life changing. It changed my life. Had I
Mm.
not had a car at that time, I mean, it's in my driveway. I still have it. I don't have a car payment. That's a lifesaver. But just having transportation, like what is kind of insignificant for one family, is life saving for another. And so something you don't really realize until you're a single parent. And I didn't have that example. Like, I didn't see my mother. I just wasn't equipped for this, and I had to figure it out on my own. And thank God for my dad coming in when he did. Like, that was so huge. And I hope to be, my husband and I talk about it all the time, like, if our girls end up in a similar situation, how are we going to help them? And my daughter said to me one time, not long ago, she's 8 now, and she goes, I'm really happy you got married. I said, why? She goes, because you're not stressed out like that anymore. And she recognized it. She goes, you're not sad, you're not scared. She goes, and now you have money. And I was like, what? And we're not, my husband's not practicing law, we're not rolling in dough, but she's like, you're not worried about money like you were when you were a single mom. And she asked me, she goes, are all of your friends single moms? Because we hang out with a lot of single moms. And I'm like, well, we're just around them because we're always doing things with them.
Community.
Like,
Yeah.
that's your, like, her normal versus my normal growing up. They're totally different things. And
Mm.
so I like, it was heartbreaking to me in my early 20s to realize that, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to give my kids just a normal nuclear family. But I'm teaching them lessons that nobody taught me. And I feel like that might be okay in the end.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I think too, like, what's normal? Like, what is a normal nuclear family anymore? Like,
No,
it's such a different picture now than it was. I'm assuming that you and I are probably very close in age, but like in the 80s and early 90s when we were probably growing up, like it's so vastly different than it is now. But I do also think like I've had clients and even friends in my life that are in really unhappy relationships or marriages in front of their kids, and I hear so many times like we're going to push through until they're like 18. And I'm like, what favors are you doing for your kids showing them that we're just going to suffer in silence, and probably not silence, right? I'm sure no one is
it's
suffering
never
in silence
silent. No,
in front of these kids. Like, realize what you're doing to their idea of relationships and marriage. Like, you're showing them that's what's normal, as opposed to, yes, it is difficult and challenging to go through a divorce and a separation and custody and all of that stuff. But you're also showing your kids that you can make change, you can come out on the other side of it. And it to me, being real with your kids, depending on their age, right? It's all, relative, but being real with them and showing them, not sugarcoating things. Like even when it comes to like talking about body parts and stuff, like
Mhm.
talking to them like little humans as opposed to children, depending on
Mhm.
what their age is, obviously. But I think that it's imperative. And I think that real life struggle, if you shelter them in this so quote like nuclear family, they don't understand the real world, and they don't understand challenge and strife if they've never been confronted with it before. So it
And the
becomes
people
kind
that
of
they
a,
need. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, it just becomes kind of what's a negative attribute to me in some ways because they're not prepared for the real world.
In the real world, they're going to meet people and they're going to live with people in college and have friends who are not from nuclear families, and they may find themselves not in nuclear families. I mean, my mother was raised by two parents who stayed married till the end, and she's been divorced twice. So like, and it's everybody. You can grow, you can try to do everything perfectly and stay married, and like we did it right and still raise kids who are addicted to drugs or who end up in
Mm,
prison. Like there is no one recipe for raising an okay, decent child. Like even kids who grow up with extreme privilege and whose parents are really loving and involved and devoted to them and each other grow up fucked up. So
mm,
but on the flip side of that, you have people who experience extreme trauma as children and they turn out to be wonderful partners and wonderful parents. And I think, it's just what you do with it. Like, I don't, my husband was raised by a single mom, and then she passed away when he was 12, and he was
mm,
raised by his great aunt who just died this past year. And so talk about not having a nuclear family. Like,
mm.
that, and he's a wonderful father and a wonderful husband. So there's no one right way of doing things. And I think I wish his mom could see the kind of partner and husband he is now, because I think when she was a single mom, he is the person that his mom really needed. And I just feel so lucky that I get that for my kids, because it's, you hear so many horror stories, and it's just nice to, like I said, to be able to rest in being a wife and mom now, when I never had that. Like I said, I was never married to someone who was really kind to me, who was really hard
Mm.
on me. Like, and in fact, he would tell me all the time, my job as your husband is to mold you into a better person. And that's not what I
Wow.
want for my kids. It's not what I want for myself. Like, your job as my husband is to love me, and we're supposed to love each other and help each other grow. But being harder on me than you are the rest of the world and other people and strangers, that's not a good partnership. And that's not the lesson I want to teach my kids. And so it was, yeah, I'm going off on a tangent anyway.
I love a good soapbox. I get on them often, but I wanna highlight what you just said about your husband because I feel like that's such a beautiful thing that he has turned into the man that his mother needed in her life as like a father figure for her kids. I think that that's such a full circle moment of and truly a testament to how he was raised and just his, there's nature versus nurture. Like
Mhm.
outside of being raised, just being a good person, but that does feel like such a beautiful circle that like
Mhm.
he is now that man that his mom would be proud of. And she sees it, depending on what you believe and stuff. She's totally present for all of that stuff. But I think that that's a beautiful testament to the partner that you have found. I had this whole idea and maybe we'll come back to the legal stuff, but I really want to like dive off into the relationship that you're in now because I feel like that's something I also see come up a lot is how to with kids, first of all, how to date. You did a story, I think you turned it to in a reel at some point about dating with children and asking your date to pay for childcare. Girl, I cannot tell you how many times I've shared that shit because I think it is so true and something I've never heard really considered before. Um, and then like hearing how you found your partner now, even though depending on how you guys found each other is pretty irrelevant, but just that you were able to bring someone into your world and start a like beautiful life with him. And yeah, tell me what that was like for you or like wherever you want to go with that side of the story, because I think it's a beautiful testament.
Well, I'd love to talk about the babysitter thing, because I think a lot of people hear that and they're like, "Oh, you just hate men. You're so entitled." Actually, it was a man
Of
who
course it
showed me
was.
that. It was a man. And I remember the first guy I really dated. By the time we were not married very long, my first husband and I. And I was so checked out. I actually filed for divorce 3 times. So I filed for divorce 6 months after our baby was born, and then I filed two more times. And the last time I finally moved out. And at that point, I was so like done. I was just done emotionally. And, within the next year, I started dating a guy who, he didn't have kids. He'd been married. He was quite a bit older and he was successful in his own right. He wasn't from here. And we went out a couple of times and then he just very succinctly said, I'd like to keep seeing you, but I want it to be something where it's not a burden for you. I'd like to be able to pay for your sitter. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Like twist my arm. That's fine. And so, so we did. And, it changed the way that relationship, it didn't last forever. We were just together maybe 6 or 7 months, but it really changed the way that I viewed, just being a single mom and coming out of that relationship, basically just like covered in blood, just like totally vulnerable and just wounded. And, I remember sitting down and writing down, I had a list of traits and characteristics and facts on paper I wanted my next serious partner to have. And I was very unapologetically like, I want someone who's in a certain tax bracket because I want my kids to not struggle. I want my kids to not know what it's like to not be able to go to school because mom's car died and we can't afford to fix it. And I think that's really contrary to what a lot of people think about single moms, which is that we just need to settle for whoever comes along, which is what I thought about myself 6 years earlier. So I unapologetically dated this guy who was doing very well for himself. And, we went to Aspen and we went to Crested Butte and we took these little weekend adventures. And it was just really, it was a nice break for me. And also to know what it was like to be treated well by someone after having not experienced that. And so, I really, that was like a shift for me, being with someone who valued my time and who knew that, I wasn't gonna commingle him with my kids. He didn't pressure me to introduce the kids. And I admired that because I think a lot of guys, they're like, oh, just bring the kids, like that'll be fine. And that's so inappropriate. It's dangerous. And so he really respected my time as a mom. And so that set the bar. And then I dated another guy. And by the time I met my husband, I kind of said offhand, I was like, yeah, I dated a guy for a while who paid for my sitter. And my husband was like, I'll do that. I'll do that. And I was like, okay. And I remember we were at an event, we were at a birthday party. It was with all of the district attorneys, the prosecutors, the DA's office, and which is a whole other story for another day. And I had said to him in front of a couple other people, I was like, yeah, no, I have 2 kids. And one of the people there were like, she's got kids. Like, how's that going to work in front of him and me? And he was like, that's okay. This is fine. I'll pay for your sitter. Like, we'll do it. And he did. And we were able to keep the relationship separate from who I am as a mom, which I needed. And I think is a safety thing. And so by the time he did meet my children, I knew it was going to be forever. I knew we were going to be together. It was when we moved in together. And so when we got married, the girls were so happy. And he adopted my eldest daughter. So he became her father, and that was so monumental. And I remember we ended up having to go to court over it, of course, because it was an adoption. And when he was asked just as an aside, when I left my ex-husband, talk about post-separation abuse, I know you wanted to talk about this, he sued me for custody of the child I had before I met him. So that was just a way of delaying the inevitable. He didn't, I don't think he ever had a leg to stand on. In fact, the judge ruled in our favor and said it would be harmful to reunite the two. But we had to go to court over it. And so when my husband got up there on the stand, I remember my mom was testifying for my ex-husband. My ex-husband was there with the attorney that she hired him. And it's just me and my husband. We just like dragged ourselves in there. It was just at the lowest point of our lives. And this attorney asked him, why did you adopt her daughter? And I thought what I think everyone thought he would say, which is, I love Emily. I'm just going to do it because I love her. And he didn't. He said, I was adopted. He said, I was adopted. I recognize the significance of a legacy and leaving a legacy to a child. He said, I'm in a position that no other man could ever fulfill for Quinn. And I wanted to give to her what was given to me, which was security for the rest of her life. And I was just, wow. I didn't expect, I mean, I knew that's how he felt, but to hear him say that up there on the stand, I was getting verklempt. I was like, oh my God, like, I didn't expect that would be something he thought about. And I think it stunned everyone because the attorney goes, okay, no more questions. Like, we're done. It
That's
can't
all I
get any
needed.
better than that.
We're done here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just, it really, like the judge was there, and we had a long history with her, and it was a very powerful moment to know, like, oh wow, this person, he didn't just do this because I asked him to, which I never did ask him. He did it because he's like, I'm in a position where I can do this thing for this child that nobody else could. I can, I like to say he used his position, his privilege as an educated legal professional, a man, to really advocate for and protect my kids in a way that I don't really see happen very often. And I think that's a really noble thing. And I don't, he's human, we're all fucked up, but
Mm-hmm.
that is like, I remember that a lot. I think about that a lot. And like, wow, like that was, like we said, I think his mom would be really proud of him.
I think too, hearing him, and I don't know if this was before or after you guys had your child together, but that's what a true parent would say, right? Like a
Yeah.
selfless, ego's not involved. I'm doing this for them. It has nothing to do with my love for her or for myself. It is strictly for her. That's a parent speaking. Like
Mm.
that is the true testament of parenthood, is like they come before yourself and your ego's not involved. And or at least the mark of a good, healthy parent, shall I say.
Right.
I want to touch on too that post divorce custody thing, especially because your ex-husband was not the father of your first child. And I've had this come up with someone that I know where a similar situation, but the ex kind of held that as his bargaining chip. Like, I'll go to court to get custody of her if I can't have custody of this one. And if you don't give it to me of this one, I'm going to take her away. And knowing
Mhm.
that it's an unhealthy environment, all of that stuff, it sounds very similar to what may or may not have happened to you. How do you how do you handle that? Like that is I remember from her perspective, it was feeling like she had to choose a child. Like, who am I going to protect? I can't really protect this one, but I can protect this one. And I remember that being a huge a stress for her. What was that like for you?
That I remember when that happened because he did not sue me for her until many, many months later after I initiated the divorce. And I do believe that my mother was the one who told him that that was a thing he could do, because right after I told her, yeah, no, the only way that this could, have a hiccup is if he sued me for her. And then right away he sued me for her. And I knew they had a
Wow.
relationship. So I was just, it was layers of betrayal there. But I remember that was when I hired an attorney, and the attorney explained to me, like, yeah, no, he might have standing, but there's a high bar, because the Constitution is on, the law is on your side when you're deciding who's around your child. And I fucked up because I let him continue to see both of the kids together, and primarily it was because they were so little. And so I let him continue to see her for about 6 more months until she said, I don't want to see him anymore. And I respected that. And I said, okay, so she's not coming and you can just see our shared daughter. And that was when he actually picked up a stalking case. So it was right after that point where he escalated and he went to jail and he was on trial, and it was just a whole ordeal. But once he was arrested, I went to court and I said, can he have supervised visitation with our shared daughter, who was 3 at the time? And he didn't see her once in that supervised setting, which really showed everyone it was never about the kids to begin with. And it didn't line up. So 10 months went by, and he was on bond and he went through trial and that was resolved. And in that amount of time, I'd gotten remarried,
Mm,
and I had, you know, moved on, and we had a stable life. And so it really wasn't until he was so like physically kept away from me that I could move on
mm,
and have some sense of stability. Because as long as there was still this, like, we were engaging with each other, I couldn't find peace. And there were certain, just the adoption thing in Colorado, it's called a psychological parent, where if you live with a child and you're raising a child together with the mother or the other person, and it can be either sex, but you can sue for rights to that child if that child especially looked to that person, the psychological parent, as a parent role. And he was allowed to do that. He was made her psychological parent. The judge was like, yeah, he raised her as a dad would for 2 years, therefore he's the psychological parent. Well, then the second part of it, you have to then basically defeat the Constitution. I think it's the
mm,
16th Amendment that says you can decide, a fit parent can decide how their child is raised. And so I showed up with my husband who had adopted this kid, and we went to court against my ex-husband. And the judge in the end was like, no, she has a dad who adopted her. And so that family unit that, we chose each other, that is the one that is the most important. And we need to preserve that union and not send her back with someone who hurt her mother. Like, we had all these findings of domestic violence. I have a restraining order. And so it was just a very cataclysmic, like, final case to be done. And it happened, gosh, he filed in 2021. And we just went to a hearing this past January and it was done. So it was decided in end of February. And if you think about it, like 3 years or 2.5 years of a kid's life, a kid who was 5 at the time, like, this client of yours, she, in my mind, I thought I had to choose, like, do I send my daughter with him or do I keep her home? Like, what do I do? Had I known what I know now, I would have immediately I would have kept my daughter home and not sent her unless it was court ordered to. And I wasn't. Like, my attorney explained to me, he's like, you fucked up because you sent your daughter to him while the case was pending, and they continued to forge that bond when you should have just kept her home, because now you're saying, well, he's a fine caretaker if I'm sending my child with him. Like, following the law to a T and knowing what my obligations are legally would have saved me time and thousands of dollars. Trying to be nice and be accommodating cost me money in the end. And I regret being so fucking nice.
Yeah, I think that so many women find themselves in that role, that people pleaser, kind of pushover. Like, I'm just trying status quo, just trying to keep everything cool and calm. I don't want to like cause any rifts, but it almost always comes back and bites you in the ass to some degree. Um, I want to switch gears for a second and talk about the nonprofit. Um, because I really want you to highlight what you guys are doing with the nonprofit, how it can help people. So, anyone listening to this, if you find yourself in a place where you do need financial support, what are some of the things that you guys find yourself getting applicants for and approving?
Gosh, it's so wide and vast. We just DoorDashed groceries and diapers and wipes to a mom of four under four, a couple nights ago. And that was, sometimes it's just like, I need food now. I was approved for this program, this welfare program, and I don't get that until the 6th of November or whatever. So I need something now. And I'm like, okay, what do you guys eat? Are you vegan? Great. We'll send you a bunch of vegan food. Sometimes it's that, other times it's, I just need someone to talk to. Like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. We get a lot of requests for attorney's fees, which is hard. We've had to add that as kind of a disclaimer that we don't pay for attorney's fees anymore. I mean, I married an attorney. I would say like the majority of our social circle is attorneys. And I think so many attorneys are scammers in the sense that they see a mom in a bind and they're like, it's $7,000 for this restraining order. Well, then that mom's now applying for $7,000 from our very small grassroots organization that we don't have. And we're going to tell her that protection order application is free. It doesn't cost $7,000. That attorney's scamming you. And it's just this, there's a lot of education that goes into it. Like, a lot of calling these women and saying, actually, I think what might help you is not, this, it's something else. Or have you tried this? Or it's, the other night I was calling women's shelters in Bakersfield, California. And I'm like, all of them are for men and they're not getting back to me. The ones that are for women, like, are there any single sex shelters for women and children? Like, I'm finding that we are almost like boots on the ground and that we're calling all these places and trying to help these people. Like I said, you have to kind of be a bitch. And now I can do that. But for a postpartum mom with 4 little kids who's homeless and doesn't have a car, I don't expect her to do that. So if she needs us to do that for her, we'll do that. We had an applicant who's, a lot of it is district attorney offices, interestingly enough, failing these people because they're victims in the criminal justice system. And they don't know that their victims compensation program at their local DA's office is supposed to pay for things like new locks on the front door, security system, like lost wages, therapy that's out of pocket. Like, now that I know about all these programs, because I've lived every single side of the law enforcement legal system, I can tell people, actually, this is a conversation you need to go back to your DA's office and tell them, hey, who's my victim advocate? Get her on the phone right now. I need to apply for this, XYZ grant for this emergency need that I have, and not take no for an answer. So a lot of it is seeing how the cracks in the system fail these women and kind of coming up with other solutions. Like we get a lot of PO box subscription application fees. Like I just need a PO box for 6 months. Say no more. We had a mom ask for, I'm not joking, $20 last month to get a prepaid phone line. And I was like, why don't we send her $500 and she can pay for a year of her phone and do some other shit that she wants? Like it's so, like, to you or me, it's not a lot of money, but to these women, it's life changing to have a car payment for the month, to have an Airbnb for a couple of weeks, to pay for a hotel. I was paying for people's hotels before we became a nonprofit. Like I would just fundraise with Venmo, hence the tax nightmare. And I want to end up in prison. I'll be like, I didn't even know. Like,
I was trying to help people.
right. Yeah, just hotels. And it's things that are emergency. Like, okay, we're not a crisis intervention agency, but if someone's like, hey, here's my situation, I need this. I would say most of the applications, though, are not concrete. They're not for tangible help. They're for advice. They're like, I don't know what to do. Like, what the fuck do I do? So we try to keep a resources page on our website. Like, here's a way to find attorneys. It's called Legal Match. Here's an application for all of the welfare programs in your state. It's right here. Here is a map for every women's shelter in your state. If you don't live near one, call them anyway and find out what resources are available to me, 3 hours away or whatever. So we assume that these women are not, they're just coming here. They're like, I get this message every day. I was sent to your page, or someone told me to follow you, or someone told me to come here, just like what you were saying. And hopefully they'll go to the website and be like, oh, like, indeed.com. I can find a work from home job. I just remember my brain being so fried and not knowing how to put one foot in front of the other. So I needed someone to be like, just go in this direction. It's right here. It's okay. And so we try to be that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We try to be that for the available resource for people. And it's hard. It's why I just hired someone, because I need my focus and my attention has to go to that part of things, reviewing the applications and being available to women and my children. Like those are my two priorities right now. I can't think about calendaring and deadlines and stuff. Like I need another brain who can say, okay, you have this to do next week, get to work. So I don't have to just sit there and freak out all the time as I do.
Well, now you can work in your business and not on your business all the time and get that fulfillment that you might be missing. Because it is its own, I don't want to say nuisance, but it's its own stress to hire someone. It is such a big pivotal moment, especially in a business or a nonprofit or any capacity, right? Just hiring someone in general. But it does open you up to being able to do the stuff that really gives you fulfillment. And I actually not copied, but saved the link to that part on your website to put in the show notes, specifically of like where to go first for help.
Thank you.
And I thought it was so good for you to have that already, knowing, because you've been through the struggle. One of the things I want to ask you before we start to wrap up is, if someone listening to this wanted to donate to your nonprofit, how would one do that?
So the website is the mamawilderfoundation.org. We have just a little link. It's with Kindful, that we accept donations all the time. We are primarily funded through passive income on Instagram. So my personal passive income that is generated from reels, bonuses, subscriptions, ad revenue, that has always been linked to the bank account for the nonprofit. So I don't even see any of that. The Lilith Project is my merchandise line that I just launched. That 10% of that stuff goes to the nonprofit, but that's separate. So it's not like, that's how I can get away with the offensive, controversial slogans I could put on t-shirts. But we are about to launch merch directly, specifically for the nonprofit. So all the 10% goes to it anyway, but you can support it through purchasing merchandise, making a donation, subscribing, monthly subscriptions. If you are a monthly donor, you will get access to the private Facebook groups that we have. We have one on health and wellness. Like we have a lot of home birth, breastfeeding, holistic health questions in that Facebook group. And then we have another that's just for relationships, divorce, family court, things like that. So that's a nice resource. We'll send those links out to women who apply also. Like if what they're looking for is not something we can fulfill, we'll say, if you're looking for community, like try this. A lot of times these people want to talk to one of us. And right now, up until now, I haven't had the time. So I'm hoping that by hiring someone, I can be more available to these people and get on an hour-long phone call and be like, hey, I think this might be, something we can talk about. Because there's a lot of overlap. It's a lot of women who are drawn to my page because of the things I talk about: breastfeeding, home birth, holistic health, who happen to also be stay-at-home moms experiencing financial abuse. So there's a lot of things that these women and I have in common. And I think they see me like having gotten out of that, and they're like, look, she still breastfeeds and home births and co-sleeps. Like, I can do that even if I'm divorced. Like, it's not the end of the world. So I'm so sympathetic because these women they're my peers. And so I want to be more available to them. And so I'm hoping to, within the next month or so, maybe not October, but starting November, hopefully do one-on-ones again, and, have those be from people who want to support the nonprofit and pay, and also people who are applying for help who can't afford it. So that's coming, just not right now.
That's incredible. The work you're doing is absolutely incredible. I honestly could keep talking. Even before we started recording, I was like, I need to hit record. I could just sit and like chit chat with you. I hope we can do this again because this was great. Anyone listening to this. I know that you got something out of this. I'm going to link everything for Emily in the show notes, and we'll come back to that. I do want you to share your hype list with me. Let me give you some backstory. I named this podcast the Hype Squad because I have this assignment I do with my clients called the Hype List. Basically, it's like your pump up, let's get full of ourselves, let's start to think of ourselves a lot higher, and it's a way to celebrate the things that you've achieved and the obstacles you've overcome, and a way to like remind yourself, I'm a bad bitch, like I can do this next hard thing that's coming down the road type of thing. And so I ask everyone that comes on just to share one thing that you can brag and be full of yourself about to celebrate here with people listening. So I would love to hear an achievement and or an obstacle that you overcame that you want to be proud of.
I was just telling my husband this morning that if you had even said to me a year ago, like, you're going to be hiring someone right now at this point in time, I'd have been like, no friggin' way. We had a really terrible 2023, just legally and professionally. And so it was just such a, like, that's where that photo comes from. And it was so hard for us, and it was really hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and just to know that we're both coming out of it and doing really well. Like, I'm now at that point now where I'm thinking about all the shit that happened to us unnecessarily and intentionally. And I'm like, if that was to put us on a path where, and I don't want to necessarily say capitalize on it or monetize it, but use it to benefit us in some way, it was
Give it
worth it. And
purpose. Yeah.
I can't be angry. Like, I can't, wish harm upon these people. I can't be like, fuck you, even though I want to whenever I see them in public all the time. But, I just think I'm finally at that point internally where I'm like, okay, I see the bigger picture. Really great things are coming. Like, I'm not afraid of talking about that thing that happened, which is it's a conversation for another day. But it's like, I heard a saying recently, was like, what's tea for you is testimony for me. Like, what might be gossip and fodder for someone else is like the story of what we overcame. And we're both professionally at places that I don't think we would have anticipated being even just a year ago, when we had a newborn baby and shit was hitting the proverbial fan left and right. So we're like, we're looking at the horizon. Like, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's like, just hiring someone, like, that's such a huge deal. Like, I'm going to get off here and I'm going to call my husband and be like, we have to figure out our NDA to send over to this person. Like, we got to get this going. It's just, I'm optimistic now in a way that I really couldn't fathom a year ago. And it feels really, really good. And like, I'm seeing more big picture, and I'm really excited for the future now.
That's amazing. It makes me think of like one of my favorite quotes and it's things are happening for me, not to me. Like if I can start seeing with that perspective of like, yeah, this sucks, but what am I going to learn from it? And then the gratitude that comes from it. Like that all really sucked, but all of these things are still really good, right?
Yeah.
That was a great share. And I'm celebrating you from afar because hiring someone, we talked about it before, is such a big deal. Most people don't understand, but I do. I get it. It's a big
Yeah,
deal.
it's crazy.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Emily, honestly, this has been such a joy. I have been looking forward to this, like I said earlier, but this exceeded my expectations. It's been so great to talk to you and hear more about your story and for you to share all of these tips. Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime you want to come back and
Thank
chat
you.
with me. So thanks for getting hyped with us. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope you have a great day. Be kind to yourselves, and we'll see you next time. Bye.